because I had done a zillion Newlywed Games, I started hosting the run-throughs, and it was real easy because one thing I didn't tell you when I was a kid, excuse me, like most shy kids, Mark Summers, myself, John Carson, we all started out as magicians. Okay.
Explain that last name.
I'm sorry?
Explain the last name you said.
The last name?
John Carson.
Oh, during Malcolm, I was shooting at NBC, and because I was, again, Art Alisi got producer credit, but he was doing prizes. Merrill was working from home. So NBC had a huge set of studios, huge set of offices, but the studios didn't have any offices. John Carson in the back had a ton of offices, and in between those offices and the parking lot, the executive parking lot, where John had the very first spot closest to his studio, which it had Bob Hope's picture and Mr. Carson's, okay, there was one office. Wheel of Fortune was taping then. They had just started shooting, and so they were across from my office. So you had to pass by my office to get to Carson's office. I was driving a red MG. John Carson was driving a white Corvette. So when Merrill would come over to the office, I'd meet him in the parking lot, and this is too long a story already, but Freddie DeCordova was the executive producer of The Tonight Show. Okay. And he had produced Jack Benny Show and the George Burns Show. And I was a huge fan. And Merrill introduced me to him, and we talked a lot. And when Merrill wasn't around, we continued talking. And he would always be in a golf cart because it was a long walk from the Carson offices all the way over to the parking lot. So we would talk, and occasionally Carson would be sitting next to Freddie. Freddie would always say, "Hi, David, how are you?" He stopped down, and John never said a word to me. He would look at me, but he never, and I couldn't say hello. And this happened a bunch of times, and I never got to meet Mr. Carson, although he saw me all the time, and Merrill would see me, and occasionally Regis Philbin would park in Merrill's parking spot. They had something going on. Merrill would show up. God damn, and I had no idea who Regis Philbin was. I finally met him, and very fast talking, funny guy, but I had no clue who he was. Merrill then later told me. Anyway, I start driving to NBC every day, and I'm driving on the freeway, and John was driving from Malibu. So we would start seeing each other because we parked next to each other, and we saw each other. We knew who each other were, even though we hadn't talked yet. And so he would wave and I would wave. Anyway, this started happening more times than not, like 3 times a week. We'd be driving in together, and we'd have this wave fest going back and forth. Because my red MG, there were very few MGs on the road, and his white Corvette was obvious. I just want to throw this in for a second. The reason Carson drove from, I learned later from him, from Malibu to The Tonight Show was because he liked to be alone. He was married, I think, 4 times, but Carson never liked, he wasn't like myself, he wasn't really an outgoing person. He didn't like going to parties, and he loved having that time alone to drive in his car leisurely and get to the studio, and then he'd go right to his office, and nobody would talk. Freddie would talk to him, and that was it. He was not a very outgoing guy. Whereas Dick Clark, who I would work for later, he would take a limo in because Dick, was constantly working. He was an executive producer, and he'd be reading the trades, and he was all business oriented. Whereas John was, more about, again, don't have to be with the wife, don't have to be with the staff, can just drive in. Anyway, we had done this enough times that finally, we arrived to the studio, and I forget what line I finally used, but because he was into magic and I was into magic, I remember I asked him, I had to make the initial contact, and I said, have you seen the trick? I forget it. Have you seen Patriotic Dice? And he knew immediately what I was talking about. He didn't even know my name at this point, or if he did, because Fred had said David a million times. Anyway, I'm taking too long for this story, but we became I won't say friends, because John, other than Michael Landon, John didn't have a lot of friends, but we did get around to talking about our names, because I said, I felt uncomfortable calling him Johnny Carson. It's Johnny Carson. Johnny, come in and do your homework. Because Johnny Carson, the name Johnny didn't work, but as a game show host, which Johnny was, but Johnny was like me. He didn't want to go into game shows. We just wound up in game shows. We wanted to be in television, but Johnny Carson sounds like a game show host. John Carson, which is what he preferred, that was his name, John Carson, became Johnny because the cadence of Johnny Carson worked. And I explained to him when I was on the radio, I couldn't say David Greenfield anymore because the hard D, David, didn't work. So it's Dave Greenfield. So make a long story way too long for everybody. I wound up calling him John, and nobody else seemed to, and he called me Dave. And again, not that we were friends, but again, because it was NBC, we shared the crew. So he started taping around 5:30, and I'd be done working on Malcolm, and then later on Battlestars, which we also shot at NBC. And I'd go on stage, and I was always, and John would see me out of the corner of his eye, and occasionally he would motion to me, and only if he had a new magic trick. He loved two things, drumming and magic. And so occasionally, I'd go back again. Pat McCormick, his head writer, I knew very well from How's Your Mother-in-Law. So I knew his staff, and I knew, anyway, he was very nice to my parents. He had a table at Beau Rivage, and he always allowed us to use his table at Beau Rivage, a French restaurant in Malibu. When he wasn't there, we sat at the Johnny Carson table. And John occasionally would come over. It was very nice, and he was a great guy. And the similarities between us, again, both kind of being shy people, and him, the difference was I would go to parties and not say anything. John would go to parties and he would leave the parties without saying goodbye, without anybody knowing, because he didn't want to, he didn't want to have to entertain at parties. And that's what we did for a living. We entertain, and brief, and anyway.
Like,
so,
like you would be doing when you were hosting the run through for I'm Telling.
Yeah, or producing or anything. You see, because I was working, we were all working 24 hours, 7 days a week. I kind of became that big person. Anywhere I went, I was, whereas I used to kind of hide out in a party. I started out being the life of the party, and then I got tired of that because people expected me to be the life of the party. Same thing with Mr. Carson. They wanted to be the Johnny Carson they saw on the Tonight Show, whereas he loved his alone time, just as I love my alone time. Because when you're doing this all the time, okay, and you're really kind of you grew up as a shy kid, as he did. Mark Summers, same thing. Mark's just a very down-to-earth guy, great magician, but he doesn't want to be Mark Summers all the time, although he's producing and doing a wonderful job. Anyway, so that's why I call him John Carson, because again, Johnny, do your homework, and that would make him laugh. That's not even funny, but that would make him laugh. But I never tried to be funny with John, and he never tried to be funny with me. It was really more about magic, and he was great. Sleight of hand, he was unbelievable. Just give him a deck of cards. I'm not that good. Patriotic dice, which is a mentalism act. You roll dice, and I guess I'm excellent at that.